Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Exile's Return. Episode 5. Chapter 26. Kellen POV. That night, after everyone retired to bed and she could hear them sleeping soundly with her wolf hearing, she slipped out of the back door and made her way to the back of the property. Using Arya's wolf strength and agility, she jumped up and grabbed the top of the 10-foot wall and hauled herself over it to the other side, dropping into the natural reserve of bushland behind their home. It was not a large reserve, about 5 acres by 7 acres, but it was enough for Arya to shift into her wolf form and run free. Kellen stripped off her clothes. She could already feel Arya's excitement building within her, felt the first ck and snap of her bones and allowed Arya to take full control and run around the reserve at will. She chased a few small animals for fun but was not particularly interested in killing any of them, just enjoyed the hunting game she played with them. For hours, Arya walked, prowled, stalked, pounced and ran about feeling totally free for the first time in months. She marked up a few trees with her claws and when the moon appeared from behind the clouds, she howled up at it, a mighty howl. Nothing answered her, no other wolves around, in other words, thankfully. Then she just lay there in wolf form under the moonlight and listened to the noises of the night, the small critters that lived in the reserve as they moved about. Kellen did not bother her, allowed her to do as she pleased. Arya had grown bigger over the last 6 years. Kellen noted how her paw prints were nearly twice the size as they used to be when in the pack. She had once been a small silver wolf, but was now a large silver wolf, would probably be the same size as Stephen's wolf, Rafe, she thought absently. Being small had made for better hiding from them all, but being bigger meant being even stronger and faster, that she would be able to put up a much better fight when and if it came down to it. It would be nice to go on a pack run with other wolves in the Shadow Crest pack. Kellen was willing to bet Arya would outrun every wolf there, but the alpha probably. She was going to let Arya try it and display all her speed. She knew Arya was impressive. It was an hour till sun-up before Arya relinquished control to Kellen and they dressed and climbed back over the wall and went back into the house. She was due to be in court today, but realized she hadn't brought any clothes with her that would suit court. She wondered if Lauren or Ray Ray had anything suitable that would fit her, or if she would have to risk going back to her apartment, which she didn't really want to. To be honest, she didn't even want to attend court today, she'd had a very long weekend and just didn't feel up to it. Perhaps a sick day, another lawyer could step in or they could postpone court to another time. She would call Jordan and tell him she was unwell, take a few days off. She was sitting in Lauren's kitchen drinking a cup of coffee with some hot toast next to her when her phone rang. It was only 6 a.m. She couldn't imagine who would be calling her at this hour, the people who would, were right here in this house. Probably Jackson again. Though how he had gotten her number she didn't know. She checked the number and frowned at it deeply. If she was recalling correctly, that was her parents' home pack number. There was no way they had her unlisted number. Only Jackson did, well now the whole unit probably. For her parents to get this number they must have called her parents and given it to them. What were they up to? She answered a little wearily, hello. Kellen, it's Brad, how are you little sister? Kellen felt hot tears prick her eyes at the sound of her big brother's voice. Hi, was all she could manage to get out, worried she would suddenly burst into tears with both joy and sorrow. I need you to come home, Kellen. It's Mum, she's really badly injured, and might not make it. LS asking for you. Kellen frowned at this, his tone did not show any signs of distress or emotional grief, he didn't sound upset at all. I don't believe you, she decided to state, because if their mum was nearly dying, surely he would be so distressed it would be heard in his voice. Arya agreed. She didn't sense any pain, sadness, distress, or anything to make her feel this was the truth. "What?" he exclaimed, appearing shocked by her statement. "Why would I lie to you?" He sounded a little annoyed. "Brad, if Mum was injured as you say, you would be very upset. This is a trick by the Alpha to get me to come home. I know this because there is no way you could have gotten my number without one of the Alpha's units giving it to you, likely Jackson. Look, Kellen, he is not even here in the pack, all of them are over there with you. There was a rogue attack early this morning and many of us have been injured. Mum was one of them. I don't believe you." "I'm sorry, Brad, it was really nice to talk to you, but I only hear lies." "I'm sorry you don't believe me," he sighed, but even that sounded false to her ears. She got off the phone and sent Jackson a quick text message, "Nice try. But Brad can't lie for SHT. Like I would believe that story." "What are you talking about?" he replied. Kellen sighed and shook her head, like she would believe that B wasn't in on it. He was the one who always called her, had her new number even though it was unlisted as far as she could recall. It was just over an hour later when Kellen started to feel uncomfortable, that her chest was suddenly tight and irritating her, and no matter how much she rubbed it, the aching wouldn't go away. "Arya. I don't know, it's odd," was all she replied, but Arya was pacing around in Kellen's mind, also uncomfortable and unable to sit still. "Something is wrong, but I don't know what." Kellen was pacing around in the kitchen with her children at the table having breakfast, watching her with curious eyes. They seemed a little worried by her sudden restlessness. She was not just rubbing her chest now but pressing on it. The pain was intensifying to the point that she was getting really worried, it was starting to actually hurt and cause her pain. Lauren walked into the kitchen and looked at her. Instant concern replaced her morning smile. "What's wrong?" she asked, the doctor in her springing to life wanting to help her. "I don't know, my chest aches all of a sudden," starting to actually further phone was ringing on the counter next to her, she was trying to breathe through the pain, "Maybe I'm having a heart attack." She thought rubbish wolves are tough, and if you were I would know. "Something else," Arya snorted at her. She checked the caller ID on the incoming call, the same number. "Jackson." She shook her head, just because the man had somehow managed to get her new number, he thought he could use it at will to bother her. She sighed and dismissed it, not going to pick up, she had more concerning issues right now. A few minutes later, a text came through, Lauren had disappeared and was now back with her medical bag, trying to get Kellen to sit still so she could get a blood pressure reading and get a heart rate. However, Kellen could not sit down, she needed to be up on her feet, to pace around. Could not sit still for the love of the goddess. Another text came through. She picked up her phone and opened it, the first text Kellen pick up quickly, "Jackson." The second text is Kellen, "Pick up, your mother is hurt, possibly dying. Pick up." Shaking her head again, she ignored it, they really were becoming bothersome and doing everything to get her to go back, using every trick they could think of. "I don't know." Arya whined at her. She was lying on the ground seemingly in pain now too. Whatever was wrong with her was getting worse, escalating and not going away. Even physically affecting Arya now. Lauren was not happy that Kellen wouldn't sit still and was trailing her with a hand on her wrist, trying to get her heart rate. "Damn it, Kellen!" The next text came through, then she received a video message. She sighed, "Fine." Whatever it was, he really wasn't going to give up on. She clicked the play button and, to her utter horror, it was footage of her mother Vera lying in a hospital bed, covered in bloodied wound dressings. Her father, Jody, was sitting next to the bed holding her hand, his head bowed low in sadness. Kellen's chest pain suddenly increased 100-fold and pain ripped through her entire body and a scream of distress and agony pealed from her like nothing she had ever felt before. Arya was howling in pain, curled up in her mind, unable to bear the pain either. The phone clattered from her hand to the floor of the kitchen. She vaguely heard all her babies start yelling and crying from the table. She was unable to do anything for them, as she staggered about the kitchen trying to cope with the sheer volume of pain coursing through her body. She had never in her life felt anything like this pain before, not even the pain of childbirth compared. She fell down onto her knees, tears were streaming down her face as she clutched at her chest. Lauren is yelling at her, asking her if she was okay. She was yelling for her husband and Ray to get in here quick, to assist her. The ache Kellen and Arya had been feeling this morning, was her mother's pain, and the tearing of the bond they shared. It was breaking as she was dying from her injuries. How could this happen when her father was the most highest-ranked warrior? Why hadn't he gone to her aid? The sobs racked through her entire body. She stared down at the phone on the floor, the image now frozen on her mother's wounded body. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. There was nothing she could do, she was too far away. Her sobs turned into howls of pain. She was really losing her mother and she was too far away to get to her, to say goodbye. She had never even known about her grandchildren, never even seen them, never once gotten to smile at them, play with them, hug them. Pain was burning now worse than before, guilt on top of pain, on top of her sorrow. It was starting to eat her alive. What had she done? She saw Lauren touch her phone on the floor and lashed out at her in her grief. She didn't want to lose the sight of her mother, couldn't drag her eyes away from the image of her bloodied and wounded body, of her father so full of sadness and devastation. But she also didn't want to look at it either. Just staring at it was rapidly increasing her pain and distress about not being able to go to her mother. Why hadn't she believed Brad, when he called? Why had she called him a liar and dismissed him? Maybe he was just numb from his pain at losing their mother. She was a terrible daughter, all the things she had done, getting banished, hiding her pregnancy and keeping the triplets a secret. It would have taken just one phone call. Surely her parents would have kept her secret, but she had to be a horrible daughter and stay away, hide everything. Guilt was washing through her, causing her pain to increase with every minute she sat there on the floor crying her eyes out, unable to cope with all that was going on around her. She heard her phone ringing, stared at the number through her tears, reached out her shaking hand and could not for the life of her touch the answer button. She could not focus on it, her vision blurred by tears so much she could now barely see straight. She just couldn't do it, couldn't focus on anything other than the utter devastation of her grief, the pain coursing in waves through her body rendering her barely able to move. It was all becoming too much. "Hello," she heard Lauren's voice. She had answered it for Kellen. Kellen didn't care at this moment, in too much pain. Her arms had wrapped themselves around her body, her howling only getting worse. She was losing it, losing control of everything, unable to find her way through the pain and guilt alike. The phone was pressed to her ear at some point and Jackson's voice came down the line. There was worry and concern lacing every word. "Kellen. Where are you? You can still get there, I'll come and get you," he told her. It's too late," she sobbed, her words stuttered out of her. She was completely broken by the thought of her mother dying. Tears were pouring out of her in rivers that washed down her face and dripped onto the floor in front of her. Her shaking was increasing and she could hear her teeth clicking against each other. It was all too much for her to bear. She wanted to be strong but suddenly felt so weak and useless. "It's not too late, Kellen. I'll come for you, honey." Let me. Where are you? Jackson's voice was calm and soft, but she didn't care. She could feel it was too late, knew it deep down inside. She fell all the way to the floor, gasping for breath, hyperventilating as she curled up into as tiny a ball as she could, trying to contain her pain. She had never felt this kind of pain before. She vaguely heard him yell an order down the line. It didn't affect her, she was too far gone to be listening to anyone at that point. Kellen had no idea of the time passing as she lay there on the floor curled into a ball, sobbing constantly, unable to explain herself or her condition to anyone. Her pain and guilt was all she knew, not why did she have to move so far away? Why was her life so hard? There were gentle hands on her, one touching her arm, the other on her face. Kellen opened her eyes, still blurred with tears, and looked up. Her eyes met with pale grey eyes filled with worry, her lips trembled and she howled out his name, Jackson, and reached out for him. She desperately needed his strong arms around her and to take comfort from her childhood friend in her time of grief. Jackson scooped her up and hugged her to his body tightly, snapped at someone to get her children. He was already carrying her off somewhere. Kellen closed her eyes and sobbed into his neck as she hugged him weakly back, not caring about where he was taking her. He did not stop for anyone, not even Tony, who was demanding answers from him. Yelling about calling the police. She heard Jackson tell him to go ahead as he strode out of the house with her in his arms. He climbed into a waiting car with her still in his arms, sobbing into his neck. He was shushing her gently, trying to make her calm down, telling her it was all going to be okay, that they would make it back to the pack in time. Kellen knew better, her pain was too great, it could only mean the bond was nearly severed, they were just too far away. I've got the pack's private plane, Kellen, we'll make it, honey, we will, he was trying to reassure her. She just kept shaking her head. How could she believe him? She knew the pack was at least 5 hours away by plane, as it was across the other side of the country, and then they had to drive from the airport to the pack, though that wouldn't take long. They owned a private airstrip 30 minutes from the pack. But still it was too long, they were too far away. Kellen was carried by Jackson out of the car and onto the pack plane. She had no idea how long it took, sobbed the whole way there. She was sat down on a seat, and found herself surrounded by her children, their green eyes all staring up at her. They were all red-rimmed and looked so very sad. The twins had trembling lips. When they looked up at her, her being so upset was upsetting them too, she just couldn't seem to help it. As she stared down at their sad faces, grief hit her anew as she realized not only did her mother not know them, but they had no knowledge of their own grandmother either. They would never get to know their grandmother, who would have loved them with her whole heart, spoiled them absolutely rotten, and encouraged their mischievousness as she had with Kellen. All of her fun-loving, pranking nature had come from her mother, who had loved to tease and rile up her mate until he was chasing her around the house or out of the house in a fun game of catch me if you can. More tears spilled down her face. I'm so sorry, she told them, and bowed her head in sadness, unable to look at them. She had hurt them and didn't even realize it till right this minute. Kellen felt a hand slide down her back, soft and gentle, knew it was Stephen by the affect. A calming sensation was falling over her. He was using his gamma charm to try and stop her distress, and she was now actually thankful for him and his gamma charm. She lifted her tear-filled eyes to meet his caramel brown ones. He was looking directly at her. Sadness filled his eyes, matching her own. Kellen, honey, just breath, he whispered with that southern drawl that came with his use of his ability. Kellen actually opened herself to him completely, accepting his gamma charm and allowing his calming aura to fall over her, because she really did need to calm down and she honestly couldn't find a way to do it herself. She had seen her baby's sadness and worry as well, but not even that had broken through to help her ease her distress. She didn't understand why she was like that. Normally she was so very strong. She needed to calm down for them as much as for herself. Her children had been removed along with her from Tony and Lauren's house by a bunch of strangers. They had no idea what was going on, or who these men were, or where they were being taken, or why their own mother couldn't stop crying. She could only imagine their inner emotional turmoil at the events taking place. Kellen suddenly found herself tired, exhausted actually, and felt herself lean towards Stephen. He slid his arms around her completely and pulled her to him, resting her head on his chest, and lulled her grief and pain-riddled body into sleep with softly whispered words of comfort. She vaguely recalled being moved about, being carried everywhere. She did not, it appeared, to have the strength to get up at all and walk on her own. She sat down on a chair and heard a familiar voice. "Kellen, baby girl." Her eyes moved to the sound of the deep but soft barotones of her father's voice, and there he was standing right in front of her. Tears washed down her face. She was finally home. She stood slowly and reached out to him. It had been 6 long years since she'd felt the comfort of being in his arms. He pulled her into his big barrel chest just like he had always done when she was a child and a teenage girl, when she had been upset over various things, and hugged her tightly, just stood there and held on to her. His chin rested on the top of her head. "Mum," she sobbed. "Alive, the doctor says the worst is over." His voice was still soft and carried an optimistic tone. "She's going to make it." More sobbing. Yes, she is, baby girl," he nodded. "Look, she's right here." Kellen turned her head and looked at her mother lying in the hospital bed. She could see the wounds still weren't healing. "Ivy," she asked about her mother's wolf. "Wolf's pain in her system, baby girl. It will eventually leave and she will wake up soon. But not likely till tomorrow. She was hit with a wolf's bane-loaded arrow, almost a lethal dose, but she hung on, calling your name before passing out." Kellen sobbed again and moved out of his arms to go and sit by her mother's side, took her hand and held it in hers, her forehead bowed down to rest on the back of her mother's hand, in the hope that somewhere in there, she would be able to sense her daughter, who she'd call for, was here just like she wanted. Though Kellen knew better, having been on the other end of wolfsbane herself, it somehow brought her comfort to hold her mother's hand and just be with her. She had wanted to be with her mother just days ago, and now here she was, under horrible circumstances, but here nonetheless. Kellen felt a hand on her shoulder. "Kellen, the triplets are very tired. I'll take them to the pack house for rest for a while, okay?" "No." She looked up at Jackson and shook her head. She turned to look at her father. "Let my father take care of them, I trust him." "All right," Jackson stated calmly. He didn't even argue. Kellen knew if he took them to the pack house they would end up in the Alpha Suite, and getting them out of there would be an issue. She might not be able to see them for a long time. She sat there for hours just staring at her mother's unconscious body. Arya occasionally whimpered or whined in her own pain. At some point she found herself falling asleep in the chair, felt she was lifted out of it and being carried again. She just leaned into Jackson's strong comforting embrace. She knew it was him, could smell him. Felt herself being laid down on a bed and tucked in. "My babies. Safe with your father as you wished, I promise." She reached out and clutched at his shirt just near his rib cage, not wanting him to go. He settled on the bed next to her. "I don't think it was Rogue's familiar scent on Vera." Arya huffed at her as she prowled around in her mind while Kellen drifted off to sleep again. Her emotional state was really taking a toll on her body. Chapter 27. Derek POV. He woke up in a bed, his mother sitting on a chair next to it. She looked very tired, just like his father had on Saturday morning after everything that had happened at the restaurant. Looked like she had not gotten any sleep at all. What time is it? He muttered, recalling his father had dosed him up with wolfsbane. She just stared at him for a minute and he thought he hadn't actually asked his question out loud, then she seemed to straighten up in her chair. Son, I need you to remain calm. Why? What did you do while I was poisoned? By my own father, he grated. It was necessary, you were as blinded by your own rage, just like Havoc gets. What do you expect? We are one and the same, and my mate was threatened by my brother, when she was already in severe distress. He sat up on the bed and looked around himself, still in their serviced apartment, he guessed. Ray called Michael and we're all going out to talk with her family very shortly. You will be going with us. Why? Because Tony thinks you took Kellen again. That got his undivided attention. Why? He asked. He had not gone near her, in fact. He'd had all his warriors back off to a safer distance to give her some breathing room, in the hope that she would calm down, and then she had disappeared. Arg, she was missing, the human feds were going to be all over him yet again. Because Jackson, Stephen, and Ethan found out where she was and went and got her and the triplets and took them back to the pack this morning, the plane left about 8 a.m. Son, you have been out for well over 24 hours now. How is that possible? Havoc is not with you, is he? She asked, leaning forward to peer at him intently. Your father dosed you with enough wolfsbane to put you and Havoc down, but seeing as he's not with you, you were out longer than expected. No, he's disappeared. What happened? Why'd they take her back to the pack and not bring her directly to me? Something else had to be going on here, they would all know better. Her mother was violently attacked by a rogue and is in the pack hospital, nearly died. Kellen did not handle it well. Derek was out of bed in a split second. I have to go to her. No, I need you to go and talk with Tony and Lauren, reassure them that Kellen and the triplets will come to no harm. Why, I don't care what they think. She sighed heavily, clearly exasperated with him. Tony, Lauren, and Ray are her human family, it seems they took her in just after the triplets were born. They are currently willing to give Michael another chance, but Tony and Lauren want a word with you in person, and seeing as you're right here, and can't get back to the pack until your plane returns for you. You son, have the time. His mouth twitched. My plane. Yours, I am willing to bet, is still here, I will use it. He was no fool, they had come on their own private plane, and if his was no longer here he would simply commandeer it for himself. No pack member would dare refuse his order. He watched his mother stand up. You can go to your mate after you talk with her new family, till then I will not allow my plane to leave the ground. So you might as well just do it. He was staring at her, he honestly didn't care about her human family, he only cared about her. She must be terribly upset. Is her mother okay? He finally asked. Yes, will be just fine from what I have heard. The triplets are with Jody and she has been placed in the Luna suite for rest. They've been separated. He didn't like it, this would only increase more fear and distress. Not my decision, perhaps just temporary. Do this one thing for me please son. Fine, let's make it quick. I want my mate and she clearly needs me. I'll understand, I'll have my plane on standby and ready to leave at a minute's notice. It had better be, he muttered, looking for his phone to call Jackson and find out just what happened while he was drugged and unconscious. They should have come and got his body regardless of his unconscious state, just his presence would have helped her. Once she smelled him. You're up, boss. Kellen, he bit out her name, showing his displeasure at his beta for the actions they had taken without his permission. Upset as expected. You might want to get back here. I actually just found out what happened. What do you mean? He just knew he wasn't going to like what he was about to hear, Mother said. Rogue attack. It seems Abby took matters into her own hands when she heard you attacked Michael over your mate. And he suddenly had a very bad feeling and his mind was weighted all of a sudden. He could feel Havoc's alpha presence returning. Apparently, Abby convinced Kellen's family to stage that her mother was attacked and injured, but Bradley is not good at acting, and Kellen didn't believe him. And, he really hated when his men didn't want to tell him things and paused out of hesitation, irked him to no end. It's not like Havoc could suddenly rip him a new one. He was on the other side of the country in the pack. Though he could now feel Havoc prowling towards the front of his mind. Well, you know, Abby took it a step further, a step too far, convinced Kellen's mother and father to actually allow Vera to be seriously injured. She used your mate bond to their daughter to convince them. They went along with it once convinced, because they want their daughter back home. Vera took a near-lethal dose of wolfsbane, and just spit it out, Jackson, or I'll reach through this phone. One swear it, he bit out, his anger starting to boil with all that he was hearing, and the hesitation and pausing. Abby ripped into Vera, to make it look like she was brutally attacked by a rogue. I didn't know anything about it, boss. I would never have approved it in your absence. From what I understand, she heard what happened and took matters into her own hands. Trying to help in her own stupid way. From one nightmare to another, could his mate ever catch a break from his family members? She was not going to take this well, probably think he had set it all up, maybe even think he had harmed her mother on purpose to force her home. Have you beaten her yet? No, boss, thought you might want that job, though I think you won't, she is pregnant. She'll keep, he muttered. I'll be there as soon as I can. Apparently, I have to go and talk with Tony and Lauren, and Mother is insisting. That may be my fault, kind of went all beta on Lauren over the phone and took Kellen and the triplets with Stephen and Ethan's help. They were nonplussed about it. Oh, a heads up, they know the triplets are yours. She must have told them. I don't care. Jackson, just make sure Kellen is taken care of and give her back her children. She was just so distressed, boss, they weren't coping, her pain, guilt and distress were affecting them. They too are just as emotionally wrung out. I sent them with Ethan to Jody's house. Stephen explained to them who he was, they seemed to just accept it and go with their grandfather. He sighed heavily. Kellen passed out at her mother's bedside about 30 minutes ago. I have brought her to the Luna suite. Stephen thought it wise to separate them for the time being, allowing the pups to stabilize emotionally, so to speak. It's going to be a very long day. I can trust you with her, right? Yes, boss. Why would you ask that? There was a clear frown in his voice. No reason, Derek muttered, but there was that nagging feeling in him. You're with her, right? Yes, his voice now laced with concern. I'm not stupid. Derek, I would never betray you. You know that, right? I know that. I just get this weird feeling about you and her sometimes. She is not my mate. He heard his beta state firmly, honestly, to try and clear things up. Just was one of my closest friends is all. All right, he rubbed his hands over his face. Jackson. Yes, boss. Don't make her feel like a prisoner or that she is trapped there, allow her freedom to wander at will. Arya too. The last words came from his beast and then he hung up. His mother was staring at him with a deep frown on her face. We had no idea, son, and also would not have approved of something like that, especially with her fragile state, she said right away, clearly having listened, with her wolf's hearing, to his conversation. "You deal with your daughter, or I will, and it will not be pretty, I assure you," he muttered, though he knew he could not hurt Abby, or even lock her in a cell for punishment if she was pregnant. But there were other methods of punishment he could deal out that would hurt her without physically touching her. He would have to consider teaching her a lesson. She had always been a handful, but she had taken things way too far this time. Abby was going to learn her place, and if his mother didn't do it he would. "Why did you go, Havoc?" he asked his wolf now that he had returned. He had yet to figure out why his wolf came and went unlike he did. "Didn't want to hurt our mate. Buddy, I know you would never hurt Kellen." "I might have, I hurt Sophia. Kellen is nothing like our last mate. She doesn't know we're her mate, that is all. She will never betray us once she knows. Kellen believes wholeheartedly in the goddess-gifted fated mate. Once she recognizes us, everything will be fine. I promise." "Hurts. I know, buddy, but we will go and see her this very afternoon. We will fix it all today," he told Havoc, knowing that finally they would be face to face and she would be able to recognize them as her mate. It was a relief, that was for sure. A weight off both of their minds. "Let's go, Mother, I need to get back to the pack. Michael is already out there. I thought it would be better to keep you two apart for now." "Wise," he agreed. "Why?" Havoc asked. "Never mind, I have punished him already." He heard Havoc huff. He didn't like being kept in the dark, but it was for the best. Leaving him out of it was a good idea at this point. Once everything was fixed between him and Kellen, it wouldn't matter anymore. "You should shower and change, shave maybe, be presentable for this family." "Why?" "From what I've heard, Tony is like a dad to Kellen, Ray a sister. So go and clean up. I've already dealt with the hotel and had your things brought here." "What happened over there?" "Nothing," he muttered, and headed for a shower. Chapter 28. He was sitting in what could only be a sitting room, in a large white brick mansion in a gated community, about 40 minutes outside the city. He had noted the coated gate and the 10-foot-high brick fencing around the property, the security cameras at the gate and along the driveway covering the front door. He was willing to bet this was where she was when he couldn't track her down after she had run from his pack. They had been met at the front door, both Tony and Lauren waiting for him. He had not smiled at them and neither of them had smiled at him. A basic greeting and introduction had been given by his father. And they had all pretty much just nodded at each other. He had been led inside. The place exuded wealth, there was white marble everywhere, with floor-to-ceiling columns off to the side of the entryway, a wrought iron railing with a redwood handrail going up the curved staircase to the second floor, with matching stairs, a deep red carpet runner that was held in place with small thin golden rods at each tread. It was more luxurious than even his pack house. His pack members wanted for nothing and the ground floor was all for them, a massive home theater, games room with entertainment tailored to their needs, multiple gaming consoles and TVs, table tennis, pinball machines, pool tables, air hockey, everything they wanted, they just had to ask. There was a gym, an indoor heated swimming pool, spas and a sauna. The library that hosted multiple sitting areas is where all the teenagers liked to hang out with each other and listen to music or just sit and chat. He could only imagine this house had many of the same things within its walls. It was extremely large and though it was just Tony, Lauren, and Ray, it was clear they did not want for anything. His mother and father were sitting next to him on the very plush couch, and both Tony and Lauren were sitting opposite him, an antique coffee table between them. Michael and Ray were standing across the other side of the room. Michael had had the sense to step well away from him the minute he had walked into the room. Derek had locked eyes with him and havoc had looked out from his eyes right at him as well. His wolf may not yet understand why Derek was angry with his little brother, but he was letting himself be known to Michael, that he was back and the boy had better bow down and do as he was told by his alpha. Michael had clutched at Ray's hand and pulled her away to the other end of the room. She had looked more than confused, but had gone with him. Derek guessed this family unit did not know what Michael had done to Kellen with her triples just meters away. He supposed that would not go down so well and would hinder the mate bond pro se, so his parents and Michael had probably not told them. Tony and Lauren had watched the interaction between the two brothers with interest. He did not know what to expect from this visit. All he knew was that Kellen had been here and taken away by Jackson and his unit at roughly 8 a.m. this morning. It was already 3 p.m. He had been unconscious until almost 2 p.m. out cold for a day and a half, annoyed him to no end, but he finally did feel well rested for the first time in weeks. Seeing as he had barely been sleeping since Kellen had run away from him, defying him at every turn. Havoc chortled, happy knowing that they would be with their mate tonight. It would be late at night, after midnight likely, but still his mate and pups were there. They were finally going to be able to sort out everything that had happened between them, which had led to this goddess-awful situation. Hopefully, she wouldn't blame him for the current situation she found herself in at the pack. He had taken his mother's advice, showered, shaved and styled his hair, pulled on a black suit, but removed the jacket he didn't want to appear too formal. He was wearing a light grey dress shirt, left the top button undone. He had decided in the shower he would at least try to placate this family, seeing as these were the people who had taken in Kellen and helped her with the triplets because he had not been around to do so. He had also recalled how Jackson had reported her reaction to the man when he had gone to her office. Kellen appeared to really love these people, which meant he was going to have to get along with them, so he had to be polite and give them what they wanted, well to a degree anyhow. He would show respect to them. He sat across from them, there was still no smile on his face, as he wanted to appear neutral at this point. "Where is Kellen? I recognized your men. They were the ones who came and took her this morning as well as the children." "I didn't know anything about that until just over an hour ago," Derek answered honestly, "but I believe her mother was seriously injured, on the verge of dying. I just found out myself. My men acted on their own. They were friends with Kellen growing up. They probably just wanted to help her in a time of need, I imagine." "The woman in the video," Lauren frowned, "is her mother? We didn't think she had a family." "What video? And she still has both parents and a brother." Lauren produced a phone from a pocket of her jacket, and accessed it. Showed him the video of Vera on the hospital bed, wound dressings covering her arms, chest, part of her face, her abdomen, and down her legs. Abby, how stupid could she be, he thought. He sighed heavily, it was no wonder she was pouring out distress. He turned the phone off, having seen enough. "Her phone?" he inquired, and at Lauren's nod, he simply put it in his shirt pocket. He would give it back to her once he was back at the pack. "Looks like it was an animal attack," Lauren pointed out. "It was a wolf, I believe," his mother spoke. "We live quite close to a forest and there is a natural wolf population there." Both Tony and Lauren's eyes moved to their only child. He could see worry written on both of them. "She will be safe," Derek assured them. "Wolf attacks don't happen often, and when they do we deal with them quickly and put the bloodthirsty ones out of their misery." As for Kellen and the triplets, he avoided calling them his children. He didn't think that would go over well with them just yet. "They are perfectly safe, and completely unharmed. I'd like to know of your intentions where our dear Kellen is involved. I'm sure you can see why we are troubled about her, where you are concerned." Tony's attention was returned to Derek as he spoke, his brown eyes boring into him. just like a good dad trying to be threatening and authoritative. Derek was not currently giving off any alpha aura. Havoc was sitting at the back of his mind listening but not participating. He wanted to appear human and of no threat to this family. Marriage, he stated simply. No, we have some issues to work out. But we will work them out. Some. Tony frowned at him, shaking his head slightly. Yes, I'll assure you it is all just a misunderstanding. Kellen has read things wrongly, and we will work them out. Your wife, Sophia. Now that did surprise him. Just how much did they know? Divorced, 2.5 years. Didn't work out, he shrugged. Do you think she'll marry you? Just because the two of you share children? Because I don't, Tony said, being very direct. Love her, always have. Derek replied calmly. He had in fact thoroughly enjoyed being in a relationship with her. He had not actually had *X with anyone else while he was sleeping with her, not even thought about it actually, so he could suppose that somewhere deep down inside, a part of him felt that very real connection to her, a bond. That is now the mate bond. Once she scented him out, everything would be able to be worked out. Then why tell her to leave and marry someone else? Ray shot at him from across the room, anger lacing her words. His eyes moved to her. She had some guts. He thought to himself, extenuating circumstances. He shrugged. He couldn't answer that question truthfully. None of them would understand. Ray would eventually understand it. Once marked and mated by Michael. That's bullsh*t. She told me herself, you loved your wife. She called him on it, right away. He watched as Michael tried to get her to stop and just be quiet. To his complete surprise, she shoved his hands away from her and stomped right over to him, right next to him, and pointed a finger right in his face, anger still coming from her. So much like his mother, he thought absently, very ballsy. If you loved her, how could you send her away and tell her never to come back? She demanded. Again, extenuating circumstances. Perhaps one day you will understand, Ray, he replied calmly. He quite liked the little human and he could see why Kellen did. She had a fierceness about her. Probably reminded Kellen of a wolf. I should beat you, she snapped, like she was. Derek frowned at her. I have never wished harm on her, Ray, I assure you. I just wanted her to come home. I missed her, had no idea about the triplets at all. I'm sorry for that. You have no idea how sorry. She stood there glaring down at him, completely unaware that she would never be allowed to do it again, never get away with this behavior and attitude towards him in the future. Ray, calm down, he heard Lauren say softly. No, let her be angry, she has the right to be angry, you all do. As does Kellen, so go ahead, yell and scream, get it all out. Derek shrugged, he could not deny them their own emotions over everything that had gone on. I would like to talk to Kellen, Tony stated flatly. You can call her, I presume. I can call Jackson, but she was asleep when called earlier, passed out from emotional exhaustion, our doctor said. Try, he stated simply. Derek nodded, pulled out his phone and dialed Jackson's number. It only rang 3 times before he picked up. Yes, boss. Derek hit the speaker button. Jackson, you're on speaker. I have Tony and Lauren here, they want to speak with Kellen. Still sleeping, Derek? You have eyes on her then? Yes, I can send a photo if you like. Do it, Derek stated. It only took a minute to come through. It annoyed him that she was clearly sleeping on the bed next to Jackson, but he had to trust him. She had a hand clutched into his shirt. Clearly, hadn't wanted to be alone. To close, Havoc huffed. He's not her mate, Havoc, just close friends, always were, remember. Havoc huffed again but stayed quiet. She looked exhausted, her face puffy from crying, and she was mostly covered by the duvet that Jackson had tucked around her. He was on it, she was under it, her hair was a mess and she wore no makeup, not that she needed it in his eyes. He pushed his phone across the table for them to see the picture for themselves. "Thank you, Jackson," he said when they had all seen the photo, and was about to hang it up when Lauren chimed in. "The triplets, even though I do not believe you would hurt them, may we please speak with them? I'll have to get Jody and Ethan to call you back on that one." "They are with Jody." "Do it," Derek said and ended the call. "It might take a few minutes. Jody is Kellen's father, by the way." They waited. Ethan actually video called, which was great because the triplets were all there and he and Havoc got to actually see them in real time. They too looked tired and worn out, but were okay. They spoke with Tony and Lauren. He handed them his phone, so they had full control of the conversation. It was good to hear their voices. They answered all Tony and Lauren's questions without hesitation, were happy to see Ray Ray. He could hear it in their voices. They were safe and okay with their grandpa, their words, and Derek couldn't help but smile. They were already adjusting to the pack. He just knew it. Could feel the kinship with Kellen's father, they had accepted him easily. They were excited to tell Tony, Lauren, and Ray Ray that it was snowing outside. "Come and look," they all yelled excitedly at the same time. Ethan had trailed them with the phone. It was the first snowfall of the season. They all ran outside to play in the snow. He watched as all three of the humans in front of him visually relaxed at seeing them so happy. He held his hand out for his phone. "May 1. Tony handed it back to him and he got to watch them for himself for a short while. They looked very happy. It warmed his heart just to know that they could be that happy inside his pack. They looked at home. "Ethan, snag them. It'll be too cold for them and I want to speak with them myself for a minute." Ethan called them back inside and sat them on the couch once more. Derek couldn't help but smile at them. Even Havoc was purring quietly inside, excited to see them so happy, knowing that they would get to see them very soon. "Hello, I'm Derek. I thought you might like it if Ray Ray came for a visit, right away." They all yelled yes excitedly and he actually chuckled, couldn't help himself. It wasn't the introduction he wanted with them but just talking to them, even though they had no idea who he was, and hearing them answer him so happily brought him and Havoc pure joy. He didn't want to end the call but needed to, had to get back to the pack. He turned back to Tony and Lauren, who were staring at him now. They didn't like what he'd said to the triplets. That was clear. They weren't ready to let their baby girl go off to another part of the country with a man they clearly didn't trust, but he was going to gain their trust the easy way. "If Ray Ray is willing," he said to the both of them, "T'd like her to accompany Michael and my family back home, and that way Kellen has someone she trusts completely with her and you both can call Ray Ray for updates anytime you like. I'm sure your daughter wouldn't lie to you. This also should give you some peace of mind, that I mean Kellen no harm." They seemed to be thinking it over. Ray Ray looked excited at the prospect. "Can I?" she asked them eagerly. "And when will we be invited?" Tony asked. "I would like a few days to sort things out with Kellen, but after that any time you like. I'll let her call you and make the arrangements. Would that suit you? If you think she will stay, she has a whole life here," Tony said, disbelief in his voice. He didn't believe that she would willingly stay a boyfriend. Derek frowned. "I'm sure can sort everything out, and I don't think she is serious about Timothy Bolton." He used the man's name so they understood that he knew who they were talking about. "About Ray Ray," he questioned them. "I would like to get back and make sure Kellen is okay and has everything she needs." He could see Ray Ray nervously biting her lower lip, waiting for her parents' permission. Technically, she didn't need it, she was 18 and could make the decision herself, but clearly wanted their approval. She was ever so slightly bouncing on the balls of her feet. "Mum, Dad, can I please go and see where Michael lives?" she was practically begging them. Lauren caved in first and Tony sighed and nodded after Lauren agreed, so the man, it seemed, went along with his wife's opinions. He would have to remember that. Ray practically squealed with delight and excitement, then ran out the room yelling about packing a suitcase. Lauren turned her eyes directly on him the minute her daughter was out of the room. "They were hard and devoid of all emotion. I will call randomly. If either of my girls don't pick up, I will come for them, and that will be it. Do you understand me? Am I making myself perfectly clear to you?" Her tone implied she was not to be argued with and that she would indeed follow through, the unsaid threat being she would remove both her girls and neither he nor Michael would be allowed to see them. Little did she know that would never happen. Derek liked her instantly. He could see where Ray got her guts from. Lauren appeared to be a lovely, well-mannered lady, but underneath she was a warrior of a woman. Not really surprising considering who she was and how she was raised. Probably didn't have to exert her authority much, but when she did, it was all there for everyone to see. She was not a woman to be messed with. Agreed. "Will you bring your father's goons with you?" he half laughed. Tony frowned at him. "Yes, we will, a whole platoon of them." Derek smiled and stood. He was ready to leave. Both his parents stood with him. "We'll wait outside for Ray," he nodded. Still amused by the two of them. They would likely all get along really well once everything was cleared up and he was mated to Kellen. Chapter 29. Kellen POV. Kellen woke to find Jackson sleeping on the bed next to her in a sitting position. It surely was an odd feeling. She lay there and just watched him for a solid minute. He looked very relaxed, his chin on his chest, his eyes closed, his arms were folded across his chest. He was still dressed as he had been earlier. He had not left her side the entire day, she knew it. She knew Stephen had also been around and for once truly was thankful for him. She felt very relaxed at this moment, compared to this morning, and being unable to cope with all that had happened, she felt light and with none of the usual weight that she had felt on her every day of her life since leaving the pack. Stephen had clearly used his gamma charm to not only calm her down but maybe take away her fear for the moment. She glanced around the room. It was very large, with a set of large French doors off to the left of the bed, with soft sheer curtains tied on either side. She could see there was a balcony out there. The furniture in the room was all in soft grey and cream. There were two wing-backed grey and cream striped chairs with a light wood table between them, for shared meals she guessed. A door that was open and must lead to the living space. There were also two other doors both open on her right, a bathroom and a walk-in wardrobe, she guessed. A long grey and white ottoman at the end of the bed, which was king-sized with a grey velour bedhead. There were several large windows and all the curtains, grey in color, were open and she could see it was dark outside. She was lying in the very comfortable bed, with a cream duvet over her. She checked to make sure she was wearing clothes. Still was, not that she thought Jackson would cross the line with her. She reached out and squeezed his arm gently to wake him. His light grey eyes opened and moved directly to hers. "Hey there," he smiled gently at her, before glancing at his watch, then back to her with a slight frown. "Where are my children?" she asked right away. She could not smell them at all, so they were not close by. "Where are we?" "With Jody at his place," he replied, rolling his shoulders in a stretch that made his muscles ripple and C0CK. Her eyes followed the movement unconsciously. "You, my dear, are in the pack house." His tone had changed ever so slightly, a hint of amusement, and when she looked up to him he had this small amused smile on his face. He had seen her watching him. "Why not with Dad?" She ignored his look and sat herself up next to him. "Your distress over your mother was really affecting them, so Stephen and I made the decision to separate you, till you could get yourself under control and together. You were really struggling, Kellen. Your distress was affecting myself and Ethan too, Stephen being the gamma not so much. It's his job to deal with that kind of stuff, I guess." "Oh," she bit her lip. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "I had no idea my being upset would affect anyone," though she had seen on occasion how her children reacted to her emotions, recalled if she was really sad, they appeared to be sad too, and became all quiet. She just put it down to the mother-child bond between them, but if her emotional state had affected both Jackson and Stephen, that was odd indeed. "Are they okay?" She hoped that they were. Her distress levels had been off the charts and she knew it, had not been able to cope at all. "Yes, perfectly fine now it appears, happy with Jody, accepted him as your father, but I'll guess seeing you hug him the way you did, meant that they knew you trusted him." Kellen pushed her hair out of her face and sighed. "Am allowed to see them?" She could already feel that weight of worry coming back. She was in the pack after all, and her alpha could stop her from seeing her children. It wouldn't take much at all. A simple order. "Of course you are. Why would you think you aren't?" He frowned at her. "You may go anywhere you like, you are a pack member, Kellen, nothing is off limits to you again." He looked at his watch. "You didn't sleep long, barely 2 hours, I surely thought you'd been out much longer." Kellen shrugged. "I don't feel like I was awake much today," and she highly doubted that she could go anywhere she wanted. "You spent the entire flight in Stephen's arms sleeping, so 5 hours give or take, and then you passed out at your mother's bedside. It's 8 p.m. now. Is this your sweet Jackson?" she asked curiously, nudging him a little playfully. She had recalled how he and his wolf had responded to her flirting back in her office. He laughed out loud. It was filled with amusement, and the grin on his face when he turned to look at her was full of happiness and cheek. "Oh no, Derek would kill me if I'll put you in my bed." The smile on her face at his reaction to her question was gone in an instant and replaced with a glare. She threw the duvet off and got out of the bed. Just because she'd had his pups, didn't mean he had control over whose bed she was going to be allowed to get into. Yes, she'd had to send Tim away, but she was not going to be bullied by him into being alone for the rest of her life. Just because his wolf didn't like another man around her children, he would well have to deal with it. "Where is he?" she asked her, worried about being in pack territory finally coming back to her completely. "When am I going to have to report myself to him, be punished?" She sighed the last 2 words out. It was unlikely she could get away from him now. Jackson chuckled at her softly and got off the bed. "He's not here, dealing with Ray Ray and her family. I'm not sure when he'll return, no Ada at this point. But he did tell me, you may go wherever you like, no restrictions at all. Including Arya." She was staring at him now, eyes narrowed on him. She didn't believe it. To be honest, she turned away from him, spotted the bathroom and headed for it. She looked a right mess, puffy eyes and slightly swollen bottom lip. From biting on it she guessed, her clothes were all rumpled and her hair was a mess. She used the toilet, washed her hands, then her face and ran her hands through her messy hair, trying to neaten it as best she could. When she came out, Jackson was leaning all casual-like on the doorway which she thought led out of the bedroom, waiting for her. She supposed pups or mum first, he asked. "My children, I am sure they are worried." Arya agreed, though she was acting a little odd, pacing around in circles inside of her mind, ears flat against her head, tail low. "What's wrong, Arya?" Vera smelled funny, want to go there again? Pups first? Kellen queried, wanting to help Arya's needs out first. She didn't usually act this way. Whatever it was, I was really bothering her. Of course, yes, Arya snorted, as though that was a stupid question. Jackson walked her out of the suite. Her eyes widened when she realized she was on the Alpha's floor. She could suddenly feel fear ebbing into her. She felt Jackson's gaze on her. She had been on this floor 1,000 times growing up. She knew it just by sight. She turned and looked at the room she'd been in and nearly stumbled over her own feet. It was the Luna suite. She heard Jackson chuckle at her reaction and turned her eyes on him questioningly. What? Where else would I put you? You did birth his pups, Kellen. Heirs to the pack. He was smiling that very amused smile at her. Like the unspoken question she had turned on him was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. That doesn't make me the Luna, she muttered. She was not his mate. I don't think it is at all appropriate, Jackson. It's completely appropriate, he replied, unless his voice trailed off as they walked down the long hallway heading for the stairs or elevator, she guessed. Unless what? She bit her lip nervously, wondering if he meant a cell. Unless, he nudged her playfully, you wanted me to put you in the Alpha suite, and his head nodded to the solid oak double doors that they were passing on her right. She could hear more amusement in his voice. Her head whipped around. Why would I be in there? She gasped at him, a little horrified by the question. The last time she'd been on pack territory he'd been furiously angry at her, like he'd want that. She snapped at him. Jackson's laughing at her was igniting anger in her. Oh come on, Kellen, it's not like the two of you have never. He left it unsaid, knowing she would get his meaning. That was a very long time ago, before he hated me. Jackson was still smiling at her, amused it seemed, even more so than before. I don't think he hates you. I think the man would love nothing more than to punish you in the fun way, if you know what I mean. He wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. Anger claimed her. He can go shove it, if he thinks after all that has happened I will crawl back into his bed. He's in for a rude shock, she grated out between clenched teeth. Oh, I'm sure he will shove it somewhere, the first chance he gets. The laughing that was coming out of him was practically making him bend over from pure amusement. Her anger boiled over. I know you think you're being funny. But it is not in the slightest bit funny to me, Jackson, she yelled at him. He stood, cleared his throat, reined in his laughing and nodded, you know, you're not as fun as you used to be. Well, I wonder why, she glared at him and then stormed off towards the staircase. She knew there was an elevator she could take. The pack house was 5 stories high, but she really wanted to stomp all the way to the bottom floor, allowing her anger and displeasure at his stupid remarks to be known. Jackson trailed her down the stairs and out of the pack house. It was snowing outside and more than a light flurry. Her eyes moved around the pack. She had always loved it when snow covered it, made everything seem just that little bit magical. There was a good couple of inches of snow. She turned her eyes upwards. Are we expecting a snowstorm? Looking to hide in a snowdrift, he seemed amused again. No, just curious is all. It's the first snow, actually, a small blizzard is expected. The Alpha might not make it back tonight if he's not careful. Those words were music to her ears, to be honest. A day/night on pack territory where she didn't have to worry about him coming for her, was a relief. She wasn't looking forward to their showdown. Jackson went with her all the way to her parents' house. Are you going to follow me everywhere? Probably, he nodded simply. You might run away again. Like you or Apollo could catch me, she shot back. Arya is so much faster than you, always has been, Nothing has changed if you recall. She smiled at him, knowing he would recall he had not been able to catch her the last time she was here. He simply chuckled, not taking the bait. Maybe we should go for a run later and let our wolves just see about that. She snorted at him. He had no idea just how big and powerful her beautiful Arya was nowadays. None of them did. She guessed they were going to be in for a hell of a shock at some point. Especially if they were to come to blows. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. Arya would likely tear into them and leave very deep wounds, ones that would leave them scared for life. She could only imagine as she recalled the way Arya had come forward against Alpha Blaine. Kellen knocked lightly on the front door of her parents' house and called out as she opened it to let her father know it was her. "In the kitchen, baby girl," he called back. She walked into the house and headed directly for the kitchen. She could smell her children in that direction as well, and the delicious aroma of steak and Alfredo pasta, plus there was something sweet. Arya put her nose to it. OMG, her father was cooking all her favorite dishes. That something sweet was a blueberry and apple pie. Kellen walked into the kitchen and there were her precious babies all sitting together eating away. They all turned their big green eyes on her and smiled at her. Arya purred so loudly at seeing them in this setting, happy with their grandfather, that her chest vibrated and the children all laughed at her and yelled, "Hi Arya," waving at them. Arya growled playfully at them, and Kellen went over and kissed each one of them on the top of their heads. So they do know what they are. Jackson mused aloud. Of course, they do. Kellen frowned at him. Why would they not? You could have raised them human? For all I'll know, he shrugged. And how would I have explained Arya to them, if that was the case? Again he just shrugged at her. Turning away from him, she asked her father, "Is everything okay? How is Mum doing?" "Still unconscious for now, but the doc assured me she will be just fine." He walked over to her and hugged her to his chest. "I'm sorry, baby girl." "What for?" she inquired, frowning up at him. He kissed her on the forehead. "Everything," he said simply. She was a little confused, didn't understand why he was apologizing to her, when she had been the one who'd never come home. "I'm sorry I got banished," she hugged him back. "Not your fault," he sounded a little angry. "Have dinner with us, baby girl." She was hungry, hadn't had anything to eat since breakfast, which had been a cup of coffee and some toast. So just nodded, it would be nice to eat dinner with her family in her family home. She turned and looked at Jackson for permission, figuring with him following her everywhere she probably needed it. Clearly he was under Alphal's orders not to leave her alone. He'd told her she could go anywhere, and with him right next to her she guessed she probably could. How very annoying. "I'll catch you up at the Pack Hospital then," and he turned and headed out the door. That surprised her, that he had left her there alone. She was, it seemed, actually going to be allowed to be able to roam free without constant surveillance. She sat down as her father, Jody, dished her up a plate. It was heaven. She had missed his cooking. The triplets were also enjoying it, it seemed. She watched Nate ask for seconds and was promptly given another serving by her father. She asked about her brother Bradley and was informed he was at his place with his mate. She stared at him. She had not known Brad had found his mate. She had missed out on so much. It hurt more than a little. "Do they have pups?" "Not yet," Jody laughed. "Brad wants to wait, he's a bit older than Victoria, and thought she might like to live her life a bit first before becoming a mother." "How much older?" she asked. "Brad was 3 years older than her, 29 now." 10 years, he only met her last year. Victoria is just 19. "Wow. Yeah, a bit of a surprise. He trained her too, when she was a junior." She's a lovely girl. Wait, what? Why are you training the juniors? Oh goddess, he had gotten demoted because of her actions. Had her whole family been punished by the alpha over that one slap? My choice, baby girl. And when I opted to train the juniors, Brad followed as well. He tried to waylay her fears, that were probably noticeable for him to see. He had always been able to read her like book. Did he demote you? Because of what I did, she still asked. She couldn't help herself. Even though he had told her it was his choice, she still worried that it wasn't and just didn't want her to feel responsible for it. No. I refused to continue to train him because of what he did. Brad also refused to take over my position because of it as well. Oh. May I ask why? I was pissed off, baby girl, and so was your brother and mother for that matter. Probably didn't go down so well then. She hoped they had not been punished for their actions. Not particularly. Alpha Blaine tried to convince me to keep training the Alpha unit, but Elle just couldn't. He lost my respect that day and I told him as much. Did you get into trouble because of me? She worriedly asked. No, Alpha Blaine said he completely understood, was also mad about what his son had actually done. But what was done was done. He tried to reassure your mother and me that you would come back at some point. I think he truly believed you would. There was this certainty in him and a tiny smile on his lips. I was never coming back, she said softly, sadly, her eyes moving to her children, who were chatting amongst themselves enjoying pie now. I can see why, he nodded. It's not a good situation, Dad, she sighed, not wanting to elaborate in front of the triplets. It'll be fine, baby girl. I assure you, he patted her shoulder reassuringly. She had very serious doubts about that. But didn't even know if he knew she'd been here a few weeks ago and didn't want to bring it up just in case he didn't. She made her way to the Pack Hospital after dinner. The snow was really coming down now. Thankfully, her parents had left her room as it was and she'd found all of her winter clothing still in the wardrobe where she had left them. They had not thrown anything out, nothing had changed in her room. It was obviously cleaned on a regular basis as there was no dust in here and the room didn't smell musty, so her parents must have opened the window regularly to air it out as well. The triplets were to stay in Brad's old room, while she could use her old room apparently. She avoided looking at the photos in the frames on the shelves and walls. There were many of her and them, the Alpha unit growing up, and 2 of just her and him as well. She was surprised that her parents hadn't thrown those ones out. She was watching the triplets as they wandered about her old bedroom looking at the photos in her room. They seemed quite curious. She guessed they were recognizing the men in the photos from their plane trip today. They didn't look much different. She watched as Nate stood in front of a picture of her and Derek and just stared at it for a long moment, his head tilted slightly to the side, his eyes narrowed, then he just walked away. She wondered if he had guessed the man in the photo was their father. Probably, the resemblance is very uncanny, Arya piped up. Maybe, Kellen thought. Her children were not known for their tactfulness. They just asked for whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. She'd never curbed their curiosity. A curious mind was a learning mind. Chapter 30. Kellen POV. She walked into the Pack Hospital, just as Abby the Alpha's sister was leaving it. She smiled right at Kellen. Welcome back, she said through the mind link, a slight smirk on her face, and then continued on her way past her. Arya pushed forward and turned to look at her, smelled her scent and almost growled at her. What is it, Arya? Don't like her? Something is wrong. Go to Vera now. Kellen would not ignore Arya's instincts, but they could come back to it later, she guessed. They both wanted to see her mother. Vera was still sleeping, as expected. Kellen questioned the evening nurse, a girl she'd actually gone to school with, Rebecca, a pretty redhead, very tall and athletic. She had been completely shocked to see Kellen. She guessed the wide-eyed stares were going to have to be something she would have to get used to for now. The whole pack would have been aware of her banishment, and likely the reason is, well, she didn't really need that attention at all but was probably going to be stared at a lot. They were indeed expecting her mother to wake up tomorrow at some point, possibly during the early hours of the morning. They would inform her father the minute Vera was awake. Her wounds were being treated as per wound protocol due to LVY not being present, and there were no signs of infection in any of the wounds. Which was good. Kellen returned to her mother's side. Arya pushed forward right away to the very surface and peered down at her through their shared eyes, then leaned down and smelled her. A growl came from her and she shoved Kellen to the back of her own mind in full control of her human body, shocking Kellen. "What is it?" she asked, but didn't try to take back control. She knew Arya's instincts had kicked in and she could sense something that Kellen could not, something that Arya was obviously not happy about. Arya leaned right down and smelled Vera's wounds, several of them. Her head whipped around as the door opened and Jackson appeared before her. He was carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee, his whole body stilled at the sight of Arya being in full control of Kellen's body. Arya didn't perceive him as a threat to her and turned her attention back to Vera, ignoring him completely. The scent was itching at her, very faint, woodsy, definitely female. The scent was old and, seeing as the wounds had been cleaned, already distorted. "What are you doing?" Jackson asked out loud. Arya ignored him, pulled off a dressing on Vera's chest and pressed herself close to it, closing her eyes to block out everything other than her sense of smell, and inhaled deeply, to try and catch the actual scent. It took only a few seconds before her eyes snapped open and a very aggressive snarl erupted from her. "Alpha scent in the wound." Kellen was completely shocked by this. Arya. Did the Alpha do this? Anger was tinging her thoughts. If he hurt her mother, he would pay. "Female Alpha scent, Abby." She growled loudly, finally recognizing the scent. Vera had been injured by one of her own pack members, by the Alpha family themselves, the very people who were in charge of protecting the pack members. "Kellen?" Jackson's voice queried through the mind link, worry lacing his voice. Arya turned and glared at him, then shot past him at full wolf speed. He was knocked completely out of the way with the full force of her strength, not something he would have been expecting. She heard him swear and get up yelling after her. He was going to be giving chase, but he would never catch Arya, never could, and she was much stronger and faster now. He was using the mind link to tell her to calm down, to tell him what was wrong, asking what was going on. She ignored him. Arya and her mind were in sync. Abby had nearly killed her mother. For whatever reason she didn't know, was she with her as the current Alpha was? Is that what that smirk had been about? Did Abby think that Arya wouldn't be able to pick up her scent? Did Abby think it was okay to attack a pack member and severely injure them, nearly kill them? Arya and she were not going to stand for that. No matter what she herself had done in the past, her family was off limits. Her family should not be punished for her actions. Arya was in complete control of their human body. Running through the heaving falling snow, heading for the pack house. Rage filled her, her claws were already out. Their family was off limits. Jackson, she knew, was still giving chase, but they were much faster than him and Arya was running at full speed. Only an Alpha could catch her now. And apparently he wasn't here. Alpha blood or not, Arya and Kellen were going to make Abby pay for what she had done. If the woman wanted a fight, she could have one. How dare she take on a pack wolf with no warrior standing? Her mother ran the pack crush and would not be a match for Abby, who had alpha blood coursing through her veins. But Kellen and Arya were a good match for the female alpha. Let's see you pick on someone who can fight back. Someone who trained all their lives with the Alpha unit, was once the head warrior's daughter. Oh, Abby was going to pay. She could hear not only Jackson now through the mind link, but Stephen and Ethan were all pushing thoughts at her, yelling at her to calm down. She ignored all of them, severing the link to them altogether with a violent tearing feeling. Her rage was not going to be dissolved by them. Arya's bloodlust and need for revenge at this time was the same as Kellen's. They were in complete agreement over what needed to happen, what they were about to do. Arya shot through the pack house front door, an enormous growl ripped out of her as she smelled Abby's scent fresh and strong. She was close by. They caught movement on their left and her eyes shot to it. Abby was running up the stairs, Arya was off at once after her. The girl at least knew that she was in trouble, running scared, and she was scared Arya could smell the woman's fear. She should be scared, and was about to be taught a lesson, one she would not forget in a long time. One that would make her think twice before acting next time. Arya was gaining rapidly on Abby. She could hear Abby screaming in fear, for Jackson, for Johnny, her mate, both beta-blooded wolves, to come and help her. She ran onto the beta floor landing and Arya was in hot pursuit, snarling and growling, her intent fully on display for the woman fleeing for her life before her. They were almost on her, just a few more seconds and they would have her, dragging her down to punish her. Johnny appeared from a doorway just down the hallway and shot forward with all his beta strength and speed to protect his mate, Arya, and Kellen in complete sync when it came to fighting in human form, let him come at his top speed and dropped into a slide as he was about to launch himself at her, taking him by complete surprise, and took out his legs. He tumbled over the top of her and landed on the floor behind her. They were up instantly, not deterred from their prey. They hadn't even taken their eyes off of Abby. No one else mattered to them at this point. She could hear actual yelling. The Alpha unit was coming, but it would be too late. Arya's body slammed Abby into the wall, bringing the both of them to a stop. They both hit the wall and bounced off. Abby screamed in pain and staggered about, clutching at her abdomen. Arya was up instantly and on her, a hand around her throat and squeezing as their other hand struck out at her, slashing at her, all claws out, ripping through the skin on her upper arms. Abby wasn't even trying to fight back and was using her arms to cover her body. Did she think not fighting back was going to save her? She was very wrong. Arya had Abby pinned up against the beta hallway wall with one hand around her throat, not trying to strangle her, just keep her in place for her beating. She would suffer as many wounds that she had inflicted upon their mother. Arya slashed again, tearing through the skin on her chest. The wounds were not deep enough to cause permanent injury but enough for her to know her lesson. She could see tears welling up in Abby's eyes, fear was pouring out of the girl, and well it should be. "Please, I'm sorry," she begged. Kellen and Arya didn't care. Their pain and anger over their mother's current state was all they could feel. "You'll pay." Arya and Kellen snarled at her in union, allowing Abby to know that she and her wolf were both of the same mind, and in sync. "I'm pregnant!" Abby screamed out. "Please don't!" Arya halted the savage blow they were about to land across the girl's abdomen. Her breathing was heavy and fast. They could not hurt an unborn child. They too were a mother. Before she could react to the news and back away, she was violently slammed into the ground and Arya reacted on instinct and shifted completely to her massive wolf form and retaliated without much thought, biting down on the man who had attacked her. It was Johnny. He'd gotten up and had come to the aid of his injured mate. His grey and black wolf burst out of him in response and turned to attack her back. His wolf was noticeably smaller than Arya, but was raged and needed to protect his mate. Arya shot towards him with her front paws all claws out. She shoved his wolf down without much effort at all and tore into his side with her teeth, yanking a large chunk of flesh off of his wolf, who howled in pain. A large aggressive growl came from down the hall, gaining Arya's attention. It was threatening her. It was Apollo in all his grey and white glory, and he was not alone. Rafe, a large reddish-brown wolf, and Thorn, a black and grey wolf, the smallest of the trio, were right there next to him, all of them stalking towards her coming down the hallway. Johnny had shifted back to his human form. His injury appeared quite severe. He was bleeding heavily from his rib cage area. He was holding on to his wound as he moved towards Abby, his mate. Arya's eyes moved to him. He was watching her and stilled instantly when she snarled at him. "Kellen, call her of." Jackson pushed through the mind link using his beta tone. She knew he was talking about Arya. "LT was Abby who attacked my mother, not a rogue." She grated out angrily. Arya could smell it. Smell Abby in Mum's wounds. "Okay," he acknowledged, though his wolf and the others were still stalking down the hallway towards her. "Unless you and Arya want to take us all on, you need to stop her." "Can't she?" is very angry. Kellen shot back at him. "So am I." "Calm down, Kellen, honey." Steven's voice purred through the mind link with that southern drawl that showed he was using his gamma charm on her. She and Arya watched him step over Johnny and then shift to his human form. His hands were out in a gesture of peace. He hunkered himself down right in front of Arya, and spoke softly to them. "Arya sweetie, calm down. Give Kellen back control please." Both she and Arya could feel his gamma charm washing over them in full force. Arya backed up a step and then two more. Steven came forward. "Come on Arya sweetie, listen to me, you know you want to, calm down, let go." Arya bowed her head and started to lay down, the effect of his goddess-given gift making her submit to him, having the desired effect on her wolf, calming her down and ridding her of her rage. "Shift back now," he told her once she was all the way down and wanting to comply with his every word. She shifted back, leaving Kellen lying naked on the floor in the middle of the hallway. She watched as both Jackson and Ethan also shifted back. Ethan moved off to help Johnny up and assisted him into his room along with Abby. The minute Abby moved from the wall, a growl ripped out of her in response to the woman being moved away from them and the punishment she so deserved. "Arya sweetie, relax, we can talk about it later, just stay calm." Arya was calm on the outside, obeying his every word, but on the inside she was still being fueled by Kellen's anger. They were a boiling pot of rage on the inside. This was not over, not by a long shot. For the moment, they were under the Gamma's control, but he'd have to let it go sooner or later. Jackson disappeared through a door and came back with clothes. He'd already pulled on his pants, tossed a pair to Steven and was moving towards her with a shirt in his hand. He held it out to her. "Come on Kellen, put this on and let's talk rationally about what happened." Rationally, she thought, the whole Alpha family was out to get her, first the Alpha himself, then his brother and now his sister. What is rational about that? What's rational about that? Arya huffed. "Take the shirt, we'll finish this later." They could not, however. Steven had yet to release them. It took him a minute before he realized he was still forcing her to submit, and released her from his aura. Kellen reached out and took the shirt and pulled it on before standing up to stare at them. Steven sighed. "Okay, let's all stay calm and go downstairs." He motioned for them all to move down the hall. Kellen, however, did not move. His charm had lifted and her anger was filling her and pouring out of her again. This whole pack was starting to feel rotten. She could not let her babies grow up here, become like all of the alphas in this family, angry and resentful. She watched as Steven and Ethan moved to go down the hallway. Jackson, on the other hand, had yet to move at all, not a single inch. he appeared tense as he stood less than an arm's length away, his body was completely still, his eyes directly on her. He was not fooled at all. Kellen snapped the palm of her hand out and directly into his solar plexus. There was a sharp intake of breath from him, but he managed to dodge out of the way of the roundhouse kick that came his way. She was crashed to the floor by Ethan as her foot landed on the ground, and instantly started to fight him, punched and kicked at him, fighting like she had been trained all her life to do. With everything she had, he was mostly defending and redirecting her attacks, not really trying to hit her back, just subdue her, she thought. It took the three of them to force her over and onto her stomach so that they could pin her down and hold her down. "Stephen, for the love of the goddess, get control of her," Jackson snapped. Kellen was screaming at them to get off of her, but they would not. They did not think she would calm down, and they were right not to. Stephen appeared right in front of her, his gamma charm flowing out of him and directly onto her. "Kellen, honey, calm down, listen to me, stop fighting." He was throwing everything at her and wouldn't let up until she was lying there with tears brimming in her eyes. How she hated his gamma charm. One day she would make herself strong enough not to listen to it. She was picked up off the floor by both Jackson and Ethan and, with Stephen still using his gamma charm, she was marched up the stairs to the Alpha's floor and forcibly put into the Luna suite. They let go of her, but not Stephen. He was still using his gift to get her to comply and go inside and stay there. Everyone left the room but her. The door was locked behind them and Stephen finally released her from his gift. She staggered a little as she was released from his aura, and Kellen, with Aria's strength, attacked the door to the suite, trying to get it open. It was locked from the other side. She kicked and punched it, lashing out with all they had, trying to force it open. "It's reinforced, Kellen. You're not getting out of there unless I or the Alpha let you out, so just calm down." "I am not opening it while you're so angry," he shot at her through the mind link. He sounded angry and annoyed with her. "Let me out," she screamed right back at him through the link he had established, her fight renewed at the thought of the Alpha coming for her while she was locked in here. "No," he stated firmly, "the Alpha will be here soon, he can deal with that temper of yours." Kellen stepped away from the door, backed away from it. She had to find a way out of this room, before he came for her. Her punishment would be even worse now. She had just attacked his pregnant sister, and though she had not originally known the woman was pregnant, she was, and that was something he would never stand for. None of them would. This was bad. "We'll go out fighting, Kellen." Arya huffed, also annoyed that they were trapped in this room. "We just need to stop him from coming in, to have a chance to get away." Kellen turned and looked around the room, then started moving furniture. She used Arya's strength to pick up and throw a chair at the door, then a table, and then the small couch, making as much noise as she could to make it like she was throwing a tantrum. "It's not use, Kellen, the door will not budge," Jackson sighed at her through the link. Kellen put every bit of furniture she could move up against that door. It opened inward. Good luck getting it open now, she thought. Then she walked from room to room, trying to find a way out. In the bedroom was the balcony. She pushed on the handles and the doors swung open. Snow swirled around her instantly. Chapter 31. Derek POV. Derek sat in his mother's private plane staring at nothing in particular. He was calm. Havoc was calm. Just speaking with his children cheered them up completely, and knowing that Kellen, although distressed and in need of her mate's comfort, had not bolted from the pack with her children the minute she had woken up also kept them calm. They were just a few hours away now. They would not be waiting till morning to meet her. They would be headed to wherever Jackson reported she was. They would not wait another minute for her to know what they were to her. He would wake her from sleep. He honestly didn't care if she would be grumpy with him. He was going to stand and watch her, watch as even in her sleep some part of her would register his scent and Arya would likely wake her itching for her mate, the minute she scented him out. He had no idea how it was actually going to go. They certainly had issues to work through, but she had known him for 20 years that would surely come into play. Surely, somewhere inside her fear-riddled body, there would be a part of her that would be happy it was him. Trying to convince Havoc not to launch himself at her might be a bigger issue. He heard Havoc chortle at him. He was also happy, inside Derek's mind, knowing he would be with his mate had put him in a good mood. Not often that happened. Derek stared down at the text message he'd just gotten from his beta, Jackson, a deep frown marring his handsome face. Kellen is locked in the Luna suite. Sorry boss had two and his calm and happiness, gone just like that, replaced by exasperation and worry for his mate. The last call he had received from his beta, everything had been fine. Kellen was having a late dinner with her father and the triplets. Everything seemed okay. She had not tried to take them and run off, even though she knew he would be back at some point. Kellen had even asked when he was going to be back. Jackson had bluffed her off with an unknown Ada, although he knew that Derek was on his way and only a few hours out, and she had not questioned it. Just seemed a bit relieved by the answer. He hit the call button only to have it rejected, which was something you just don't do. No one dismissed an alpha's phone call. Well, with the exception of Kellen, he thought, she definitely would, but she had other reasons, fear-filled reasons which he had to talk to her about, make sure she knew that there was nothing to fear, that he meant her no harm, but he knew he could not address her fears until he came face to face with her. A text came through in short order. Sorry boss, don't need her knowing how close you are. Already angry and losing it. For the love of the goddess, he closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. What had happened in the last hour or so? He was still in the air a couple of hours away. What happened? He texted back. How much can possibly happen in an hour and this late at night, with snow falling on the pack? Most of the pack members would be in their homes by now, staying out of the cold. Arya let loose on Abby. And Arya, well, boss, a lot bigger than she used to be. Almost as large as Apollo is. Arya was larger, and almost as big as Apollo. That was an utter shock. She had been such a cute tiny wolf, barely reached Havoc's chest when they had stood side by side. She almost always looked like a pup of a wolf. It was so cute, it had always amused him to no end, something they had all teased her about, how such a tiny wolf could have such a fierce human counterpart. Now it appeared Arya was not only just as fiercey, but also had the build to go with it. He could feel Havoc wagging his tail in his mind. He was happy with the news. Mate strong. Derek already knew that. Perhaps it was why his mother and father hadn't wanted a fight between them. Perhaps his father was right in the thought that even Storm didn't want to fight her, she was different than before. Why at Abby? He asked, though his gut was telling him he already knew the answer to it. Smelled Abby on Vera's wounds, I believe. Abby still alive? Her pup. Injured, as is Johnny, both in the pack hospital. Ethan is with them. He sighed. I guess Kellen taught Abby a lesson, one she really did need to learn, he supposed. He hoped that her unborn pup was all right. But his power-crazed sister had better have realized that she can't just go around unchecked and do as she pleased. Better have learned her lesson. She had put her unborn pup at risk and hadn't even known it at the time. Perhaps this would make her learn a desperately needed lesson. Will the pup survive? Should do, she screamed. She was pregnant, that's what made Arya stop, mostly took hits to her arms and chest area, so it should be fine. So Kellen is locked in the Luna suite because anger rolling off of her, might rival Havoc's boss, in that department. It took Steven to bring her down and fully submit using all his gamma charm ability, then Ethan and I, to get her up here, but the minute he stopped using it, angry again. Goddess help us both, he thought absently, if the two of them went toe to toe when they meet up. Never Havoc huffed at him. I'm telling you Arya will want me. So much faith you have, Havoc. She was made for me, supposed to be strong. Our mate is supposed to even us out, buddy, not match your anger issues. Is she still angry? He texted Jackson. Yes, currently throwing furniture around the Luna suite, it'll be destroyed likely by the time you get here. Stay there with her. What is the weather doing now? Snowing hard, you might not get to land local. Just great, but he'd already heard as much from the pilot. He was just hoping the storm would blow over and they could land. The storm, it seemed, was moving faster than expected and it might calm down or move away before they got to the landing trip. Keep me up to date and let me know when she calms down. Will do, boss, just get here ASAP. Derek leaned back in his seat. Nothing, it appeared, was ever easy for the two of them, one setback after another. He truly hoped that Havoc was right, that Arya would want him right away. It will go a long way to Kellen wanting him as well. His eyes fell on his mother and father. They were watching him. Trouble, son? His father asked through the mind link. They couldn't risk a wolfen conversation with Ray Ray on the plane even if she was currently sleeping, against her mate. Yes, Kellen and Arya found out Abby was the one to hurt her mother. You can imagine the fallout after your encounter with an angry Arya. Abby, his mother asked right away, worried about her baby girl. Injured, and her mate. Both are going to be fine. You might want to call your wayward daughter, his mother nodded. He got to listen to the call with his wolf hearing. Abby was crying and sobbing the whole time. She stated she couldn't believe what Kellen had done to her. He watched as both his parents' eyes had fallen on him and he shot through the mind link. What did she think was going to happen? Nothing at all. He heard his father verbally reprimand her for her actions, which was what landed her in her current situation. That she had to learn she couldn't just go about doing whatever she felt like and expect to get away with it. She'd stopped crying and retorted with anger that she was an alpha, that she answered to no one. Derek sighed more with annoyance than anything. So that was what she actually believed. Well, she did answer to someone, to him in fact, and she had, without his permission, laid hands on her future Luna's mother. Hearing her words pissed him right off and he finally understood there was only one punishment that was going to put his power-crazed, power-hungry driven sister in her place, and he intended to act on it whether his parents liked it or not. He held out his hand for the phone. Abby, you will report to me first thing in the morning, because you answer to me. He grated out. I will relay to you your punishment directly. What you did was utterly without conscious thought to yourself, your unborn pup, your mate, and to how Kellen, your future Luna, might feel or react to it. Not to mention, you actually convinced a pack member to allow you to nearly kill her. That alone is punishable by years in the cells. Your injuries, as far as I am concerned, are your own fault. Abby, for once, did not say anything at all. He handed the phone back. He could feel another set of eyes on him and turned to find Michael staring at him, a concerned look on his face at what he had just said to his sister. He knew he had stated things aloud which Ray might have heard, but the girl would find out soon enough anyway. His parents were staring at him too. He simply turned to them and raised an eyebrow. He had not spoken out of place. He was the alpha, not them. He had no intention of imprisoning his sister. Let them all wait for the consequences of her actions. He didn't need to ask permission. She was his sister, but she was also a pack member and the girl was about to fall in line whether she liked it or not. A text came from Jackson around half an hour later. She has calmed down, tantrum over. Good, he sent back, I want Abby in my office first thing in the morning. Yes, boss. And Hayden and his snowplow waiting at the strip, to assist my arrival. Already there, boss, I sent him the minute L thought you'd get caught in the storm. That is why you're my beta. Thank you, Jackson. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.